and welcome back to my channel. For this week's video, I rewatched all the Spider-Man films and will give my thoughts through a tier list. Now, Spider-Man was my childhood superhero, the one I grew up loving. I loved Batman as well, but Spider-Man was my favorite, and I watched the Raimi films on repeat growing up. This might inform some of my takes, of course, as my earliest memory of going to the theaters was to see Spider-Man 2. I have a soft spot in my heart for those films, but today's video will examine my fresh thoughts on yet another rewatch, and how they stack up amongst all Spider-Man films. Now I'll do this in a semi-chronological order, with the Raimi films first, then the Mark Webb films, then the MCU films, before finishing with the Spiderverse films. So let's begin. Starting off with Spider-Man, which I'll be putting into the A tier. You can see that Sam Raimi is trying to figure out how to incorporate his style into a big blockbuster action film, and in my opinion he does a very good job, and on rewatch it still holds up very well. Yes, it's corny and cheesy, but that's part of the point. It also has some serious heart to it, and it really does care about Peter Parker more than just as an obligation to check off as we move on to the big action scenes. We care just as much about those small character moments. This movie really does incorporate them well, really makes them a centerpiece. We have a very small cast of characters that have tons of emotional character moments throughout, where they all are able to bounce off each other with a really strong cast, and I think that's a really great element of this film that makes the action scenes then have more weight and makes the whole thing a lot more watchable and rewatchable. Now, like I said, very small cast of characters, very great strong emotional moments, but also the action is then incorporated around those moments in a very strong way and is directed very well. Now look, obviously the CGI maybe doesn't hold up very well anymore, but I would say that Sam Raimi kind of had a great understanding of the limitations of CGI. Yes, it's a new toy, it's fun, you can do things that were never able to be accomplished before, and a lot of people really did think it was very realistic looking at the time, but it just doesn't really hold up anymore, and that's why his insistence on doing a lot of things practically holds up much better than a lot of other films of that era, and I think that's a very strong selling point on a rewatch of this film. Now, not only does the action hold up very well, but the romance is very captivating and still keeps your attention. It's still very strong, right? It's a strong element of the movie, and it really does nail those scenes in a very strong way. The kiss scene is obviously super iconic and very well done, but also smaller moments, right? Less dramatic moments, like the scene in the hospital between Peter and MJ, in which Peter is telling MJ how he feels about her. I find that very awesome, and it's a very great moment there between the two of them, and they're two very good actors. The Uncle Ben and Aunt May scenes are also awesome, and it just showcases every little character here is portrayed by a really good actor. We have a very good cast. It makes it feel like it's a big deal, like this is a big movie, obviously a large budget film with a very stacked cast. Willem Dafoe is my favorite actor. I love him so much, and he really gives a truly awesome performance. Now look, a lot of people critique the suit and the mask and whatever, they say it's a bit silly, but to me, it also forces Dafoe to become truly unhinged, right, in a way where he has to really sell his just mania, even through the very bulky, like, Power Rangers type suit that everyone always talks about. And I think he does that really well here, and his scenes as Norman Osborn are just so impeccable and just fun. He just has a kind of a campy style that he's doing, but it works well within the universe of the film, and he's just such a scary character, and that is so, it's just unsettling, even in the moments where he's not Green Goblin. When the Goblin takes over, it's just so scary, and that is when you know that you have a very good and strong villain. I think Raimi really nailed that about all his movies, and in this one in particular. I mean, this is one that really unsettled me when I was a kid. Green Goblin was someone I was very scared of, but I was also very intrigued by, and so it just has so much power, all those scenes with Green Goblin and with Willem Dafoe. The cast in general, like I said, is just very stacked. Tobey Maguire, of course, doesn't look a day under 30 in this, which does hurt the illusion of him being a teenager, but I still love his performance, and I love the casting choice. It is a really strong performance. He does have an emotional core to his character, but he also kind of nails being Peter Parker, being this nerdy guy. Yeah, he doesn't look like a teenager, but he kind of incorporates the spirit of the character in a really strong way, and I think the Peter Parker elements are stuff that really holds up well on rewatches, and I think he does a good job as Spider-Man. I think a lot of people sort of question him as being really incorporating that part of the character well, but to me, I think he does a good job. He does do a few quips here and there, maybe not as much as Garfield or Holland, but to me, he really does have that kind of fun spirit, and he is clearly having a lot of fun being Spider-Man as well, and I think that's part of the character, part of the essence and the spirit of him. And so I think he does a really good job here. I will critique one little element, and that is just one little crutch of his, and that's anytime there is a moment where he has to cry, he always does the one single pretty tear, which I always find silly. And I think he just kind of leans on that too much. But outside of that, he does have a strong emotional core to him as well. Just like every character, they feel like real people and they have real weight. And I think that I love the way that Raimi portrays this character. He has him being very flawed, very human, that makes mistakes constantly. He has to keep trying to be a better version of himself. And that is how you do superheroes. You don't do perfect humans. You do humans that are deeply flawed, that have superpowers, but it doesn't make their life any easier. It just makes the choices that much more stark. And I love that, the sort of sense of responsibility that he has to be a better person. And he's still trying to figure it out. He tries to figure it out through the whole trilogy, and I just love that. I love that he never truly does figure out. He just keeps trying to be better. And that's such a great way of incorporating this character, great way of bringing it to life. So not only does Raimi understand that you have to have emotional vulnerability for your characters, especially for your main lead superhero character, but you also need physical vulnerability. Raimi understands that you need to kick your hero's ass, and he does that constantly with Green Goblin. Your heroes need to fall down repeatedly, but what defines their heroism is that they keep getting back up, and this film nails that. The final fight scene is really awesome because you do feel like he's going to die at any moment. The Green Goblin has the upper hand, but he fights back at the last moment and is able to win, and you just feel like it's so triumphant and awesome, and it doesn't feel cliched. It's really executed in such an awesome way, and it's iconic, right? There's so many iconic moments, and this movie is filled with those iconic moments. When you rewatch it, it's just like a meme factory, and to me, seeing all those memes and seeing the staying power that it has really showcases the cultural significance that this movie had in the United States, at least. It is such a powerful movie, not just for me, but for the culture at large, and I think that's why it definitely belongs A tier. Before we move on, I do want to mention one little thing as well, is that I really do love the ending of this movie. I love that we go back to the small character moments. That is such an awesome way to end it, and I love this movie very much, not just for nostalgia, but I think on rewatch, it still holds up very well. So now moving on to Spider-Man 2, which I'll be putting into the S tier, because this movie really showcased how you're supposed to build on a strong foundation, how you're really supposed to elevate material that was really strong to begin with, and takes it into the stratosphere. We continue with the heartfelt character moments and human drama and the romance elements, but they're made a little bit more darker in this film and less corny and cheesy. But this much more self-serious tone, I think, is nailed by Raimi, who does a much better job of incorporating his own style into the film. There is some seriously intense sequences of horror-like action, with tons of just screaming women throughout the film. With all these like close-ups and zoom-ins into screaming women, it just really feels like a horror movie at a lot of moments. And it feels like a Raimi movie, definitely. So like I said, much more self-serious, but we also get some great action sequences. And I think this has some of the greatest action scenes of all time, or at least for a superhero movie, right? Just awesome. So many iconic moments again, right? It's obviously, once again, lots of memes and iconic moments and things that have strong cultural staying power. Look, the starting scene is so great and perfect. It does such a great job of showcasing how we're going to elevate the material. The pizza delivery scene, in which we really do get a feel for the working class superhero that Spider-Man is. We get to see the struggle of Peter Parker trying to just make it on his own while still being able to utilize the superhero powers, and the cool action sequences filmed in a really fun and energetic way by Raimi. It's just awesome. And then we have the iconic pizza time moment. I mean, there's just so much great stuff here, and it's just, it really does showcase the juggling of responsibilities that Peter Parker has to try and do, being Spider-Man, and it sets up the struggle he's going to have, the existential crisis he's going to have. So this small little moment here, it's really strong, and to me, it's just as weighty as his epic battles that he has later on in the film. So a great way to start the film, and in my opinion, Raimi really did know then how to deliver on the set pieces, and he continues to elevate the set pieces throughout the film, and it just feels epic, iconic, right? All the fights with Doc Ock are just awesome. The train scene is obviously super iconic, and look, it helps that Alfred Molina is so likable as the villain. I mean, he's just having a great time. He does kind of remind me of Willem Dafoe's performance, but in my opinion, his performance is a little bit more relatable as far as he's more of a likable guy. Norman was just an asshole even before he became Goblin, and Goblin was just a scary guy. Doc Ock isn't as scary, but he feels more vulnerable and more human and more relatable. And that kind of makes his connection with Peter a little bit stronger and have a little bit more weight, as opposed to kind of the cynical usage of their relationship at the end of the first film that the Goblin tried to utilize to kill Spider-Man. So here we have just a really great villain with Alfred Molina as Doc Ock. And Parker, again, really does make a lot of mistakes in this movie that are because he is trying to juggle all these responsibilities that he has. He is not as in control as he would like to be of his own life. He's not perfect. The way he treats Mary Jane is really tough, and he really struggles with that. He struggles so deeply as to deciding, can he have what he wants, or does he have to live up to this responsibility that he feels like the death of Uncle Ben has really put on his shoulders? So the moment he decides to give up on Spider-Man really does feel cathartic, and so does his return. His questioning and existential angst really do feel deep and character-defining, making those moments of web block feel real. Once again, we have a great cast in this film. I didn't really talk about J.K. Simmons' casting as J. Jonah Jameson, but he's obviously perfect in the role. In general, right, the whole cast is really, really good again. James Franco and Tobey Maguire's dynamic is definitely part of the film's more self-serious tone, but I think it helps to build that through line into the third film. I just love this movie, right? The action scenes are well done. The filmmaking in general is really kind of almost experimental in moments. Raimi's really just throwing a lot of stuff at the wall, but it's all landing and it's all working very well. The CGI, again, is maybe questionable, but because of the practical effects that they're doing, it really holds up a lot better than other movies of the era, of course. And just in general, I think Raimi does a much better job of incorporating his own obsessions into the film, his own filmmaking style, while also elevating what was already so strong about the original. So again, absolutely deserves to be an S tier. It's an absolute masterpiece and one of the best superhero movies of all time. So now I'm going to try and move a little bit quicker through the rest of these movies. I have a lot to talk about right with Spider-Man. These Spider-Man movies are so awesome. I love the character, and I obviously have watched these movies so many times, especially with the Raimi ones. But let's move on now, right? Spider-Man 3. This is one that is very polarizing, right? We have a small but dedicated group of people that are trying to sort of redeem it in the public's eyes, trying to sort of reacclaim it as a really great film. And then we have the general public and the general critical reception, which is very negative of this movie. And to me, I put it in the B tier, so I do believe it's a good film. I do think, obviously, it received a lot of hate, but I also don't think it's some misunderstood masterpiece. I think it's a very messy film. Obviously, Raimi has distanced himself from it. Obviously, there was a lot of studio intervention and things like that in the project, so I can understand why he's disappointed by the failure of it. He kind of ended sour with the Spider-Man whole thing, right, which is disappointing for his career, I think, because I would have loved to see him continue to work within this world. But to me, I do think it's a good film, but very sloppy and messy, and fails to execute on its very ambitious scope. On rewatch, I still can't help but appreciate everything that it still does right, however. There is still a strong emphasis on character moments and Peter Parker. His character in this one is showcasing all the negative aspects of his personality that were already there. It's not turning him bad, the Venom, but it's amplifying the worst aspects of his personality. He must learn to grow and try to be better for the people in his life that he has hurt as a result of this. It's a cool development for his character, and it fits within the trilogy's arc for him. So really, he's never fully good, like I said, or fully the type of man he wants to be. He's constantly trying to be better, which I love. So one of the criticisms that I did agree with on my prior watches that I've changed my mind on is the idea of bloat or sprawl in this film with too many villains and just too many things going on. But to me, I actually kind of like how each villain represents an aspect of Peter Parker's personality that he has to try and overcome to be the better version of the type of man he wants to be, of the type of hero he wants to be. So you have Sandman, who has really grown on me in this watch, and that is about him having the ability to forgive others and himself for inflicting pain on others. He's able to forgive someone who did something that was so terrible that so deeply hurt him. Then you have James Franco and his love for his friends overcoming the pain that they've caused each other. So that is what his character represents in the fact that he kind of overcomes his own aggression and is able to then work with Peter Parker at the end, right? James Franco's character, Harry, and obviously he dies at the end. He sacrifices himself for his friend, and I love that. I love that character development for Harry. There wasn't really anywhere else for him to go, so it makes sense that he died. Then we have Venom, which is really Peter's aptitude to fall into aggressive negative personality traits. This ability to really inflict pain on others, and the fact that you have to overcome that and understand that that isn't the type of man you want to be, though it is possible that you could become that if you don't work on yourself and try to improve yourself. And I think he sort of gives in to the negative traits that he already has and really amplifies them with Venom. And I think that in general, towards the end of the film, he's just starting to be able to forgive himself, be able to forgive others, and really go through this arc. And that's what I love about this movie. Like I said, it's not a great film. There's a lot of problems. It's very messy. The filmmaking is very sloppy here. It's obvious that there was studio intervention and a lot of last-minute changes and things like that. So I don't think it's a misunderstood masterpiece, but I do think it's underrated. It has more heart than almost any modern superhero movie. It has some interesting visual filmmaking, great acting, and character development, and one of my favorite ending scenes to a series. The ending scene to this trilogy just being Peter Parker trying to get forgiveness from Mary Jane, and the two of them just holding hands and then dancing. It's such a small character moment, but it represents exactly what Raimi was trying to do, and it shows the arc that he has gone through in this trilogy, and especially in this movie. So Spider-Man 3, I think, is a good movie. It's very underrated, but it only belongs in the B tier. It's not quite matching Spider-Man or Spider-Man 2. Moving along to The Amazing Spider-Man, I'm going to be putting that into the D tier. Now look, I think Andrew Garfield, that was a good casting choice. I think Emma Stone was as well, and their chemistry is really the highlight of not only this movie, but of both of the movies. Those two just have a really good thing going, and I think that is the emotional core that drives the engine of this movie around a lot of other messy elements. So this movie just suffers from having a stupid villain with a stupid mind plot. It looks pretty cool visually, with some interesting ideas in that regard. The movie is really trying to sell the romance and investing in that, which does land, but nothing else really does. Garfield's pretty good as a Spider-Man, but nothing he really does matters. The fight choreography is lame, nothing iconic or memorable happens. It's just completely opposite of the Sam Raimi movies, right? It's trying to kind of follow in that shadow, but it just feels like a weak imitation. It's just not a well put together movie. Every single beat that they take from the first film from Raimi is done in such a worse way. And look, why do we need to see Uncle Ben die again? Why do we need to replay all these same beats that we've already experienced? Try something different. There are small moments in this that work and are cool, like the skateboard scene where Parker is kind of figuring out his powers. That's cool. But in general, I don't think that this one matters at all, has no weight to it. The cast is kind of questionable, right, outside of Garfield, Stone, and Sally Field. I think the rest are pretty questionable. Like I said, lacks weight, scale, consequence. Don't really care as much about Peter or his problems in this film. The villain is more contained, lurking in the sewers, as opposed to the grand battles of the Raimi film. The Stan Lee cameo was cool, but that's just kind of representing once again that there's disparate good elements that don't cohere into anything beyond a cheap-feeling imitation. Moving on to The Amazing Spider-Man 2, I'll be putting that into the D tier as well. It feels like a lot of the same as the first film. Again, Stone and Garfield are solid. Again, the villains are weak. But they feel even weaker here. Their origin stories feel so rushed and scrapped together last minute. We don't care about them, and they don't feel as personally connected to Peter Parker as in the Raimi films. Parker's moral problems are represented in less interesting ways. Again, a pretty film with some cool visuals, but doesn't elevate the very substandard material. The conspiracy stuff is boring. The story of Parker's parents doesn't seem to matter or have weight. The fights, again, aren't that interesting. Though Stone's death is a well-done scene and probably the strongest moment of this duology. Green Goblin is incredibly goofy and silly, and he has this insane elevated feel that isn't executed well, so it feels more like a bad soap opera than something truly fun in an unhinged way. What a way to waste the incredibly talented Jamie Foxx as well. So a bland, bad movie that had pretensions to franchise building that just further serves to dilute the product. This attempt at Spider-Man was a serious failure. Next up is Spider-Man Homecoming, the first in the MCU Spider-Man films, which is a choice I don't really agree with, right? It's not a great choice to incorporate it into the MCU. And if we are going to have an MCU Spider-Man, why can't we have a creative director allowed to do his own thing separate from that Spider-Man like we have with the Batman films from Matt Reeves? So the consistent references to the broader universe hampered this individual film. The casting of Tom Holland was solid. He's a good Spider-Man and Peter Parker. His baby face also helps to look the part. Zendaya was good casting as well, though in this film, they don't have as many moments together. Michael Keaton was a good choice for Vulture, but he feels underbaked as a villain. The time jump leaves a lot of cool storytelling on the chopping room floor. Vulture is cool and his reasons are interesting, but we don't feel as much for him or about him. Not as many cool or iconic scenes either as in any of the other Spider-Man films. Another thing that really does hamper the film, which is tied into the MCU stuff, is the constant appearances of Iron Man and Tony Stark, and they're very intrusive on the film. I'm glad they skipped over retelling his origin story again, but really, right, this isn't an interesting substitute. I'm glad we don't have the spider bite, the death of Uncle Ben, but Really, this is just allowing them to have less interesting MCU stuff fill that void. And the lack of feeling of a neighborhood, working class type of Spider-Man really does hurt the film. The way his powers are also incorporated into Stark technology rather than just his own powers feels dumb as well. The love interest in this is boring, and Parker's struggles aren't as engaging here. They make an attempt to be a coming-of-age story, but it's just filled in with generic stuff. The heart of the story feels missing. It also feels way too CGI heavy and weightless in combat. Ultimately a decent film, right? It's well made. Most MCU films are. But it does feel held back from something greater. So not as messy as the Garfield ones, but not as grand and epic as the Raimi films, without the heart that those films really represented. So C tier. Moving on to Spider-Man Far From Home, I'm also going to put this one into the C tier, and it's another film that deals significantly with the greater MCU. This means the necessary inclusion of scenes that take you out of the story in favor of larger obligations. I want a great standalone Spider-Man movie, and this is not that. The idea of traveling through Europe is cool, and there are some cool shots and locations at times, but we also spend a lot of time in less interesting locations that look uglier. There are elaborate action scenes that again feel weightless and green screen and CGI to death. Holland and Zendaya are great together and have strong chemistry. She is consistently the most interesting aspect of these movies. Jake Gyllenhaal is fine, but again, the villain feels hollow and rushed. Reminds me of the villains from the Garfield films. There are some interesting visual moments with Mysterio, but it all leads to a less interesting final fight scene. It's funny and builds its characters better than the first film, but it still falls short of the emotional weight necessary to build true characters and moments. So it belongs in the C tier. Next up is Spider-Man No Way Home, which I'll be putting into the B tier. Now look, there was a lot of hype for this movie, and I'll admit I loved watching it in theaters. It really indulged my Spider-Man fandom, and I relished seeing Maguire, Defoe, and Molina on the big screen. And I'll say that this film had much better character moments, much better weight to the fights, with the Goblin fight scene feeling not only iconic, but also emotionally and physically exhausting, with the culmination in the death of Aunt May being really well done, and the way it sets up two competing philosophies is very compelling. This feels like the first moment in this version of the series that we get Spider-Man making serious choices about what kind of hero and man he wants to be. The film features a large cast filled with great actors. Garfield does a great job here with better material than he was ever given in his own standalone films. Defoe does awesome as well. The choice to make him the main villain and to drop the mask works perfectly, and he is truly unhinged. However, the film does feel like a meme factory in a bad way. While I appreciate seeing all my favorite characters, the constant callbacks and famous quotes from the original films really got nauseating after a while, and the constant stopping of the momentum of the film for fan service really hurt it as well. This hurt the humor a bit as well. Now, that being said, Zendaya and Holland were again having great chemistry, but overall the film just kind of felt disjointed and overstuffed, while omitting lots of characters in ways that don't make any sense whatsoever. It felt like they just got whoever they could and called it a day. Most of these villains were not necessary, and there's villains that maybe were more necessary that aren't there, and there's so many of these ones that they kind of just shove aside and don't really add anything, like Lizard, right? Mostly like it's Jamie Foxx's character, it's Doc Ock, it's Green Goblin, like these are the main villains, and Sandman and stuff like they're just completely unnecessary and just feel weirdly there, just for maybe like a quote here and there. So this makes the film feel like a Spider-Man appreciation rather than an actual true film at moments. Though overall, there still is a strong core here that wasn't present in the previous films. Hopefully with the continuation of the series, we see them truly embrace the superhero's working class roots and make that a serious struggle for him. This is a film that has serious problems that I also enjoy the hell out of. Next up is Spider-Man Into the Spiderverse, which I'll be putting into the A tier. Beautifully animated and an awesome origin story. There's great energy, great music choices, and great editing. It's a fast-moving and fun Spider-Man film that feels fresh. Very well done technically with great writing, voice acting, animation, editing, etc. This feels like what we've been missing from the MCU Spider-Man films, true creativity and bold choices. Miles Morales feels like a real person with real problems that we care about, and the other Spider people are developed well. The villain's story matters and has weight. We care about what happens, and the fight scenes are well done. This is a significant film in the Spider-Man universe that brought back serious heart and creative genius to the series. And finally, we'll finish up with Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which I'll be putting into the S tier. So it took everything right from the original and expanded beautifully, even better animation with a more ambitious scope. Everything looks, feels, and sounds beautiful and in rhythm, and every aspect works together to create a true masterpiece. The broad canvas that this film plays with is truly epic and adds weight to the struggle of Morales. This is how you do a multiverse film, not Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness or anything stupid like that. It feels so creative and bold that I can't help but love it. It features characters who mess up big time and in relatable ways. These are flawed human superheroes that I love. I also love the emotional vulnerability and strong character moments they all have with their own loved ones. It adds so much to an already beautiful film. This is the best of what is possible and feels like Spider-Man fan service done in service to a great story. This is how you accomplish all sorts of references and callbacks within a broader story where it doesn't feel cynical or attempting to set up further sequels, spin-offs, or other films or series. It doesn't have to hold your hand to explain where we are in the universe. We just get to experience an awesome story, mind-blowing and truly epic, with great rooted characters that give us big emotional stakes and weight to the action scenes, and the non-superhero characters have weight as well. Obviously just part one of a film, which is what it is, which is really annoying. But if Beyond the Spider-Verse continues with this quality and finishes the trilogy strong, this will be one of the best superhero stories ever told, and this film is already one of the best animated films I've ever seen. Definitely belonging of the S tier. Alright, so that just about does it for my video. Thank you all for watching. Please let me know in the comments down below where you would rank Spider-Man films, which one is the one that you grew up watching. So thank you all for watching, and see you next week.